Okay, so let's dive right in. Whenever you hear leaders or military planners talking about war and conflict, you've got to realize they're often using a very specific, kind of coded language. It's a language of red lines, of signals, and a whole lot of hidden meaning. So in this explainer, we're going to decode what is maybe the most powerful phrase in that entire dictionary.
You've heard it a million times, right? Boots on the ground. It gets thrown around constantly on the news and in political debates, but what does it actually signal to the people making the life or death decisions? Because I can promise you it means a lot more than just, sending in soldiers. Answering this question is pretty much the key to understanding modern American foreign policy.
All right, first, let's just get a feel for how heavy this phrase really is. We're not just talking about a saying here. This is a critical boundary. It's a political and a military tripwire that, believe me, everyone in Washington, D.C. understands.
Just 5 words, but inside the Pentagon, inside the White House, U.S. boots on the ground is a deliberately loaded phrase. It has the power to start or stop a debate cold. It signals a potential commitment that absolutely no leader takes lightly.
So here's why it carries so much weight. Boots on the ground, that's the point of no return. It's a signal that a president is now personally, politically responsible for how that war turns out. And even more directly, it's an admission that American casualties are no longer just a possibility, they're now a certainty.
So, why? Why is this red line so bright? Why all the extreme caution? Well, the answer isn't in some strategy document. It's seared into the institutional memory of the U.S. military from very, very recent history.
This phrase right here, it's like the ghost in the machine. This is the core belief that shapes pretty much every single strategic discussion about military intervention today. It's less of a strategic assessment and more of a deeply, deeply felt warning.
And that's because, for the whole generation of officers and policymakers who are now in charge, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they defined their careers. They lived the reality of what happens when a ground war spirals out of control. And that experience created this powerful gut instinct to avoid it at all costs.
From a planner's perspective, that death trap isn't about clean battles on some open field. No, it's about brutal urban warfare. It's about ambushes and IEDs where there are no front lines. It's the nightmare of getting bogged down in nation building for years and years with no clear way out. And maybe most importantly, it's the cold, hard understanding that as casualties start to pile up, public support for the war just evaporates.
So this deeply ingrained fear of the death trap, it didn't just lead to caution. It fundamentally rewrote the American military's entire playbook for how it even thinks about conflict in the 21st century.
The shift in strategy is, well, it's stark. The post-9/11 approach was defined by one thing: committing large numbers of conventional ground forces. The modern playbook? It's the total opposite. It's all about avoiding that massive commitment by relying on standoff weapons like air power, using elite special operations for really targeted missions, and, this is the big one, working by, with, and through local partner forces to do the actual fighting on the ground.
But hold on. This isn't just about military strategy. This language is also an incredibly powerful tool in the world of politics, where leaders are constantly trying to balance looking strong with avoiding unpopular wars.
And this is where the strategy becomes all about politics. You see, sometimes the threat of action, or deliberately delaying a decision, that is the strategy. It lets a leader manage this immense political pressure from all sides without actually having to make the incredibly costly decision to commit forces. It's a really high-stakes balancing act.
And here's kind of how that buying time strategy usually plays out. A leader might just be waiting, hoping the political pressure dies down, or for some other event to shift the public's focus. They might use that time to pressure allies to carry more of the burden. Or, in the most cynical calculation of all, they might just be trying to kick that hard decision down the road until after the next election. Okay, so we've covered the military history, we've covered the political strategy. What does all this actually mean for you when you're just watching the news or scrolling through headlines?
This right here is the big takeaway. Now, when you hear a politician say something like they are not ruling out any options, but are also determined to avoid boots on the ground, you get it. You understand the massive contradiction there, and you see the unstated red line in that statement. You can see past the public rhetoric and recognize the powerful forces pushing against a major ground war. You're in on the code now.
And all of that leaves us with one final and pretty unsettling question. The entire political and military establishment has spent the last 15 years or so designing a system specifically to avoid this one outcome. But in a world full of complex, unpredictable threats, what happens when air power isn't enough? What happens when those local partners collapse?
What happens when the option everyone wants to avoid suddenly becomes the only one left on the table? That is something to think about.